The phone rang at 2 in the morning. At first, I thought it was an emergency call from the hospital, maybe one of my patients. I reached for it half asleep, rubbing my eyes. But when I saw the caller ID, my stomach dropped. It wasn't the hospital. It was the night guard from our neighborhood security booth. I answered, my voice groggy. Hello? There was a pause, then a shaky whisper. Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but your son is standing at the gate. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My body went cold. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone tighter. What did you just say? He repeated it, slower this time. Your son, Ethan Nolan, he's here. Says he lives at this address. I sat straight up in bed, heart pounding so fast it hurt. That's impossible, I said, my voice breaking. My son died 3 years ago. Silence filled the line. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. Then, in a frightened tone, he said, Then who is this, ma'am? Because he's looking straight at the camera. That was the moment my heart stopped. My name is Grace Nolan. I'm a nurse at a community hospital, a widow, and the mother of a boy named Ethan who passed away in an accident 3 years ago. He was only 14. Not a day goes by that I don't think about him. After his death, I tried to move on, but I never really did. I still live in the same house where he grew up. I still cook the same meals he loved, even if no one's there to eat them. His room remains untouched. His posters, his books, his favorite gray hoodie still hanging behind the door. Some people call it unhealthy. I call it love. Every Sunday morning, I visit his grave at Oak Ridge Cemetery. I always bring daisies because they were his favorite. I sit on the grass, talk to him like he's still here, and tell him about my week. Sometimes, when the wind picks up, I convince myself it's him listening. It helps me keep going. Work became my distraction. The long hours at the hospital kept me busy enough to forget, at least for a while. My coworkers tried to help. They'd invite me to lunch or ask about my weekend plans. I always smiled and said I was fine, but every night, when I came home to the empty house, the silence reminded me how much I'd lost. My neighbors were kind too, especially Mrs. Coleman from next door. She's an older woman who checks on me often. Sometimes she brings homemade pie or sits with me on the porch. Once, she said softly, "You have to start living again, Grace. Ethan wouldn't want you to stop." I nodded, but deep down, I couldn't let go. I didn't know how. That night, everything was quiet before the call. I had just finished my shift at the hospital and was dozing on the couch with the television still on. The house was dark, the clock on the wall ticking softly. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how ordinary. Then the phone shattered that peace. When Harold, the night guard, told me Ethan was at the gate, I thought it had to be a mistake, maybe a neighbor's son, maybe a prank. But then he described what he saw. "He's wearing a gray hoodie, ma'am," Harold said. "Jeans and sneakers. He said he's been waiting for you to wake up." I felt my throat close. That was exactly what Ethan had been wearing the day he died. I stood up, heart racing, and looked toward the front window, expecting to see flashing lights or movement. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint hum of crickets. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "Harold, are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said quietly. "He even knows your name." He said, "Tell Mom to hurry, it's cold out here." My knees nearly gave out. I sank onto the couch, shaking. My mind fought against it. It couldn't be true. Ethan was gone. I had seen his body, buried him myself. I whispered, "You must be mistaken." But Harold's voice broke when he answered, "I wish I was, ma'am, but I'm looking at him right now on the security camera." I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to hang up, crawl under the covers and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But another part of me, the mother part, wanted to run outside and see for myself. What if, by some impossible miracle, it really was him? I turned on the porch light and stared through the window into the darkness. The gate at the end of the driveway was barely visible under the faint glow of the streetlight. Everything was still. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed again. A video feed from the security booth. On the small screen, I saw the outline of a boy standing outside the gate. He was completely still, head lowered, hands in his pockets. My breath caught in my throat. I zoomed in slowly until his face became clear. It was him, my son. At least, it looked like him. The same hair, the same posture. But something about the way he stood felt wrong. Too still, too quiet, like a shadow pretending to be real. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. I just stood there, staring at the screen, trembling. Then Harold whispered again, "Ma'am, what do you want me to do?" I didn't know how to answer. If you want to know what happened next, the truth about that night and who was really standing at my gate, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The next part will leave you breathless. The clock on my wall read 2:13 a.m. The only sound in the house was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. My hands were shaking as I held the phone, staring at the frozen image on the security feed. The boy standing at the gate looked exactly like my son. The same build, the same hair falling over his forehead, even the same gray hoodie he'd worn the day before the accident. But it couldn't be. Ethan was gone. I'd buried him myself. I'd seen his lifeless face one last time before they closed the casket. My mind tried to find logic where there wasn't any. Maybe someone was playing a cruel prank. Maybe it was a neighbor's kid who looked similar. Maybe the camera feed was glitching. But deep down, something in my chest whispered that this wasn't a mistake. I didn't want to believe it, yet I couldn't deny what I was seeing. I picked up the phone again and called Harold back. "Harold, don't take your eyes off him," I said, my voice barely steady. "Describe him to me again." There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then Harold spoke, his voice trembling. "He's just standing there, ma'am, still as a statue. But it's strange. His face looks pale, like he hasn't seen sunlight in years. He's not blinking either." A chill ran down my spine. "Can you talk to him?" I asked. "I tried," Harold said. "I asked his name again. He said, Ethan Nolan. And when I asked how he got here, he just smiled. It didn't feel right. That smile. It's not how a kid smiles at all." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt dizzy, like the room was closing in. "I'm coming there," I said, grabbing my jacket. Harold's voice rose, almost pleading. "Ma'am, don't. Stay inside. I'll handle this. Maybe it's someone pretending to be your son." I stopped by the door, keys in my hand. My mind screamed at me to stay put, but every part of me that was a mother refused to listen. "If it's Ethan," I whispered, "I have to see him." The night air outside was sharp and cold. The porch light flickered weakly as I stepped out, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The street was silent, empty. I could see the gate at the end of the long driveway, faintly lit by the street lamp. From where I stood, I could just make out a figure. My breath caught in my throat. "Ethan," I called softly, my voice breaking. The figure didn't move. I took another step forward, my shoes crunching on the gravel. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. I could see his clothes now. Jeans, worn sneakers, that familiar gray hoodie. My pulse quickened. Every instinct told me to stop, but I couldn't. When I was just a few yards away, I called again, louder this time. "Ethan, it's Mom." The figure slowly lifted its head. Under the dim light, I saw his face clearly for the first time. It was Ethan, the same small scar on his chin, the same soft brown eyes. But those eyes, they weren't alive. They looked empty, hollow, like they were staring through me instead of at me. My knees went weak. "This isn't real," I whispered. "It can't be." Suddenly, my phone rang again, startling me. I fumbled to answer it. It was Harold. "Where are you?" he asked urgently. "I'm at the gate," I said, my voice shaking. "What? Don't go near him," he shouted. "Ma'am, listen to me. I just checked the camera again. He's gone." I froze. My eyes darted toward the gate. The boy was still, there, motionless. "No, he's right here," I said. Harold's voice cracked. "No, ma'am. On the screen, the gate's empty. There's no one there." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. My body went cold all over. I turned back toward the figure. He was still standing in the same spot, head slightly tilted, like he was curious about me. I took a step back. "Ethan?" I said again, my voice trembling. "If that's really you, please say something." For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, so softly I almost didn't hear it, he said one word. Mom. It was his voice. The exact same voice I used to hear every morning when he'd call from the kitchen, asking for pancakes. I felt tears spill down my cheeks. It's you, I whispered. He took one step forward. My heart stopped. His movements were slow, stiff, unnatural, like someone learning how to walk again. I stumbled backward, shaking. Stay there, I said. Please, don't come any closer. He stopped. For a moment, it was silent. Then the gate creaked. I didn't touch it, but it began to open slightly. The sound echoed through the still night, long and metallic. My hands trembled so badly that I dropped my flashlight. The beam flickered across the ground, landing on his shoes. They were covered in dirt, fresh dirt, dark and wet, like he had just walked out of the ground. My breath caught. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there staring at the impossible. Then, from behind me, Harold's voice shouted, Grace, step back. I turned to see him running down the road toward me, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. I turned back to the gate, but the boy was gone. The gate swung slightly in the wind. The only sound left was the trembling rattle of the chain against the post. Harold reached me, panting, his face pale. I told you not to come out, he said, gripping my arm. I saw it too, ma'am, but when I looked again, it was gone. I stared at the empty spot where my son had stood. My tears fell freely now. If he wasn't real, I whispered, then what did I just see? Harold didn't answer. He just kept his flashlight fixed on the gate, his jaw tight. The night felt heavier than ever, and deep down I knew something had changed. Something that couldn't be explained by cameras or logic. Something had come back, and it wasn't over. The rest of the night felt like a fog I couldn't escape. After the figure at the gate vanished, Harold and I stood there in stunned silence. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes, both too afraid to break whatever had just happened. The cold air bit at my face, and I realized I was still barefoot, my slippers covered in dirt. I could see my own breath in the chill, and it made the world feel unreal, like I was trapped between dream and nightmare. Harold was the first to speak. Let's go inside, he said quietly, glancing toward the empty road. It's not safe out here. I followed him back to the porch, my legs heavy, my heart still hammering. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see Ethan standing there again. But the gate remained empty. The street was still, the only movement coming from the swaying trees. Inside the house, the warmth from the heater wrapped around me, but it did little to calm the storm in my chest. Harold sat down on the couch, rubbing his temples. His face looked pale under the lamplight. I know what I saw, he said firmly. That was a boy. He was real, at least for a moment. I nodded slowly. It looked exactly like him, I whispered. Same clothes, same voice. He hesitated, then asked, You said your son passed away 3 years ago? My throat tightened. Yes. A car hit him outside the grocery store. It was late. The driver never stopped. My voice cracked on the last word. I thought I'd finally made peace with it. But now, I trailed off, unable to finish. Harold leaned forward. I've worked this shift for almost 20 years, and I've seen strange things, but never something like that. We should check the footage. The thought of watching it again made my stomach twist, but I nodded. We went to the small security booth near the front gate. The air inside was cold and smelled faintly of coffee and metal. Harold sat at the monitor and rewound the footage. The screen flickered with static before showing the live feed from a few hours earlier. There he was, the boy, Ethan. He stood just beyond the gate, staring directly into the camera. His face was pale under the yellow streetlight, and his expression was blank, almost too calm. My breath caught as I leaned closer. It wasn't just his face. It was his posture, his mannerisms, the way he slightly tilted his head when he listened, exactly how Ethan used to do when I talked to him. Then something even stranger happened. On the video, Harold's flashlight beam crossed the frame, and Ethan turned his head slightly toward it. But when Harold reached the gate in real life, he had seen no one there. On the footage, the boy was still standing there, watching. Then, without moving a muscle, he seemed to fade, not step away, Not turn, just dissolve into the darkness. Harold paused the tape, his hand trembling. "How's that possible?" he whispered. "There's no cut, no edit, nothing." I couldn't speak. Tears blurred my vision. I reached out and touched the screen as if that would make him real again. My fingers met the cold glass, and I felt something deep inside me break open. "He's trying to tell me something," I said softly. "Grace," Harold said, his voice careful, "I think this is something else, something we shouldn't mess with." But I couldn't listen. A mother doesn't ignore her child's voice, even when it comes from the impossible. When I got home, I sat in Ethan's room for hours. The faint smell of his shampoo still lingered on his pillow. His drawings were pinned neatly on the corkboard, sketches of stars, spaceships, and superheroes. He had wanted to be an astronaut one day. I traced my fingers along one of the drawings and whispered, "If you're really here, please give me a sign." At first, nothing happened. Then, from the corner of the room, a soft thud. A book had fallen off the shelf, one of Ethan's old journals. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It opened to a random page where he had written a note from years ago. "Mom, if I ever get lost, I'll find my way back to you." My breath caught. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I spoke to him out loud. "Ethan, are you trying to come home?" The light in the hallway flickered once, then twice, before returning to normal. It could have been coincidence, or maybe not. I decided then that I needed to understand what was happening, to know if it was grief driving me crazy or something beyond reason. I called Father Thomas, the priest from our local church, someone who had been there for me after Ethan's death. He arrived before dawn, his presence calm and steady. I told him everything, the call, the figure, the footage, the journal. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he said gently, "Grace, sometimes souls linger when there's something left undone, but not all who appear are what they seem." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "You think it's not him? I think you need to be careful," he said. "Whatever you saw, it wants something. You must decide if you're ready to face what that is." His warning echoed in my mind long after he left. As the morning light began to filter through Ethan's window, I realized he was right. I had to face it, whether it was my son reaching out or something wearing his face. That night, I made a decision. I would go back to the gate, alone, at the exact same time. If Ethan's spirit truly lingered there, I had to know why. I had to hear him again. I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living in fear. It was time to face the darkness that had followed me for 3 long years. And whatever waited for me at that gate, I would meet it. The next night came faster than I expected. The hours crawled through the day, every tick of the clock pulling me closer to the moment I'd decided to face. I barely spoke at work. I kept hearing Father Thomas's words in my mind. Not all who appear are what they seem. But even then, the thought that it could really be Ethan was stronger than my fear. I needed to see him again. I needed answers. By the time midnight came, I was sitting in Ethan's room, holding his old hoodie in my lap. The gray one, the same one the figure at the gate had worn. It still smelled faintly of detergent and boyhood, a mix of innocence and memory. I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "If you're really out there, I'll be waiting." At 1:45 a.m., I slipped on my coat and stepped outside. The air was colder than the night before. A light fog hovered over the grass, and the streetlights glowed weakly through the mist. My heart raced with each step as I walked down the driveway toward the gate. The world felt strangely quiet. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of my footsteps crunching on gravel. When I reached the gate, I stopped. The metal felt cold beneath my hand. I stood there for a few seconds, staring into the empty road, half hoping, half dreading what I might see. Then, as the clock on my phone turned to 2 a.m., the security light flickered on by itself, and he was there, Ethan. He stood exactly where he had been the night before. Same hoodie, same jeans, same stillness. His face was pale but soft, almost glowing under the light. My chest tightened as tears filled my eyes. "Ethan," I whispered. "Honey, is that you?" He didn't move. Then, slowly, his head lifted. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I felt something deep inside me break and heal at the same time. It was him, my boy. I could feel it. I took a step closer. I missed you so much, I said, my voice trembling. Please talk to me. He blinked once. Then, in the quietest voice, he said, Mom. It was exactly his voice, the one I'd heard every morning before school, the one that called for me in the hospital when he was sick. I felt my knees weaken. I reached my hand toward the gate. It's okay, sweetheart. You can come home. But something stopped me. As he stepped forward into the light, I saw his shoes, still covered in dirt, the same dark soil from before. His clothes looked damp, like he'd walked through mud. A part of me didn't want to believe what that meant. My voice shook. Where have you been? He looked confused, almost sad. You left me, he said softly. My breath caught. No, I didn't, I said, shaking my head. I never left you. He frowned. It was so cold. Tears streamed down my face. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I reached for the latch on the gate, but the moment my fingers touched it, a sudden gust of wind blew past me. The temperature dropped sharply. The motion light flickered again, and Ethan's face changed. His expression turned blank. His eyes, once warm, went completely dark. Then, in a voice that wasn't quite his, he said, You should have come sooner. My stomach dropped. That voice, it was deeper, distorted, hollow. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Ethan. He tilted his head slowly, the movement jerky, unnatural. You left me in the dark. Before I could move, a blinding flash of light burst from the security camera beside the gate. I shielded my eyes, and when the light faded, he was gone again. I turned in circles, searching the shadows. Ethan! I screamed. My voice echoed down the empty street. Nothing answered. Then my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. It was Harold, calling from the security booth. I answered with shaking hands. He was here, I gasped. He was right in front of me. Harold's voice was frantic. Grace, get back inside now. I can see you on the camera, but there's something behind you. I spun around, but there was nothing. The fog thickened, and I could barely see the trees at the edge of the road. I took a step back toward the house, my heart pounding. Harold, what do you see? His voice came through the static. It's him, ma'am. He's standing right behind you. My blood ran cold. I froze, afraid to turn around. Slowly, I felt something. A presence. The faintest brush of air against the back of my neck, like someone breathing too close. I turned, and there he was. Ethan stood less than a foot away from me, his face expressionless. But now I could see clearly. His skin was pale like ash, and his eyes reflected no light. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Tears blurred my vision. Please, I whispered, if you're really my son, let me help you find peace. For a moment, nothing. Then his lips curved into the faintest smile. Goodbye, Mom. A single tear slipped down his cheek, and as it fell, his body began to fade. The mist swirled around him until there was nothing left but the faint sound of his voice, echoing like a breath of wind. I love you. The fog cleared as quickly as it had come. The light by the gate steadied. The night was still again. I stood there crying until the first traces of dawn touched the horizon. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood where he'd been, feeling the cold air against my skin and the weight of years finally lifting from my chest. When Harold reached me minutes later, I turned to him and said softly, He's gone. He looked confused. Are you sure? I nodded. Yes. This time he said goodbye. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt at peace. Whatever had come to me that night, whether spirit, memory, or something beyond understanding, had finally found its way home. And as the morning sun rose, I whispered into the light, Goodbye, Ethan. Thank you for coming back. The morning after that night felt like waking from a dream I couldn't fully remember. The fog had lifted, and sunlight poured through the windows of my kitchen, warm and golden. It was strange. The same house that had once felt so cold and hollow now felt alive again. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't wake up with the heaviness of grief sitting on my chest. I just sat quietly at the table, a cup of coffee in my hands, staring out the window toward the gate where I had last seen Ethan. Everything felt different. The air, the light, even the silence. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Harold stopped by later that morning. He looked tired, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. "I checked the footage again," he said, his voice careful. "After you saw him, the cameras glitched for about 30 seconds. When the feed came back, you were alone." I nodded. "I know." He said goodbye. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think it was really him?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. I think it was what I needed it to be. Maybe he was never gone. Maybe I just couldn't see him until I was ready to let him go. Harold nodded slowly, like he understood. "I've worked this job a long time, ma'am," he said softly. "I've seen strange things, but I've never seen peace look the way it does on you right now." His words stayed with me long after he left. That evening, I found myself walking toward Oak Ridge Cemetery. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in orange and pink. The world felt calm, gentle, as if nature itself was exhaling after holding its breath. I carried a small bouquet of daisies, the same flowers I had brought every Sunday for years. But this time, there was no sadness in my steps. There was only gratitude. When I reached Ethan's grave, I knelt beside it and placed the daisies down. The marble stone was cool under my fingertips, his name carved in smooth letters I had memorized long ago. I took a deep breath and spoke softly. "Hey, sweetheart, I saw you last night. Or maybe it was your spirit. I don't know how it happened, but I felt you. You're safe now. You don't have to come back anymore." The wind stirred gently, rustling the leaves around me. It wasn't strong, just enough to move the petals of the daisies slightly. I smiled through my tears. "I think that's your way of saying goodbye." For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to cry uncontrollably. The ache was still there, but it was softer, like a scar that had finally healed. I sat there for a while, watching the sky fade from orange to blue, until the first stars appeared. When I got home that night, I walked into Ethan's room. I hadn't touched it since the day he died, but now I knew what I had to do. I opened the curtains and let the moonlight pour in. Dust floated in the beam of light, like tiny stars dancing in the air. I looked around at his things, the posters, the drawings, the stacks of comic books. Every piece of him was here, frozen in time. I sat on his bed and whispered, "You're free now, and so am I." The next day I started packing. I didn't throw anything away. I donated his clothes, kept his favorite books, and framed his drawings. I placed one photo of him on my nightstand, the one where he's wearing that gray hoodie, grinning from ear to ear after winning a soccer match. Every time I looked at it, I felt warmth instead of sorrow. Mrs. Coleman from next door stopped by while I was cleaning. When I told her what had happened, her eyes widened. "Grace," she said softly, "you think he came back to say goodbye?" I smiled. "I think he came back to set me free." For weeks after that, I slept better than I had in years. The nightmares stopped. The guilt I used to feel, the endless questions of what if I had done more, began to fade. I realized that my grief had been keeping him here. The love between a mother and her child doesn't die, but sometimes love means letting go. Life slowly returned to something close to normal. I started gardening again, something I hadn't done since Ethan's accident. I went out with coworkers, laughed at things that used to feel meaningless. People noticed the change. One nurse said, "Grace, you look lighter, like something's lifted off your shoulders." I smiled. Maybe it has. I still visit the cemetery every Sunday, but I don't bring daisies out of sadness anymore. I bring them out of love, to celebrate his life, not mourn his death. I talk to him the same way I always did, telling him about my week, my patience, the garden, and sometimes, when the wind blows through the trees, I swear I can hear his laughter, not haunting, but happy. One night, I sat on the porch as the wind chime swayed softly, the same one that used to ring when Ethan came running home from school. The sound was gentle, comforting. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Good night, sweetheart." The chime rang once, clear and bright. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not, but I smiled anyway. That night before bed, I finally opened the window in my bedroom, something I hadn't done since he passed. The cool air felt fresh and new, like a beginning instead of an ending. I realized that grief doesn't truly end. It transforms. It becomes part of who we are, shaping us into something stronger, softer, more alive. Ethan's visit taught me that love doesn't fade with death. It simply changes its form. Some goodbyes aren't about losing someone. They're about learning how to live again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and comment where you're watching from. Because sometimes, stories like these remind us that even in our darkest moments, love always finds a way to reach us.